Our next speaker is Michael Ratner. Where's Michael? Okay. Michael is an attorney who is president of the Center for Constitutional Rights and co-host on WBAI radio program Law and Disorder with our good friend Michael Smith, who's also here this evening. And he's the past president of the National Lawyers Guild, and it was under his leadership that the Center for Constitutional Rights, just months after the opening of the Guantanamo prison, mounted legal challenges to illegal detention and detorture by the United States government. He also helped shepherd a legal response to the gross violations of constitutional rights by the Bush administration on a variety of post-9/11 actions. Michael, his wife Karen Ranucci, and their two children, Jake and Anna, recently returned from a 2-week trip as part of the Free Gaza Marchers in Cairo, and then on to Israel and the West Bank. Michael will this evening address what he learned on his visit to Israel and the West Bank. Please welcome Michael Ratner. Stand
6 inches, okay. Well, I'll echo what was said by the last speaker, how remarkable it is to see so many people in this room. I mean, even myself, 5 years ago, I think there would have been 50 people in this room. And I think the way we're going to end what can only be called the apartheid state of Israel is by activism by people in this room, by people who are on the Gaza Freedom March, and by not just speaking, but by acting, whether it's marching, whether it's the BDS campaign, whatever we need to do to end what I consider to be one of the world's really most horrific crimes. I wound up going on this march really because of Abdeen. We had decided to go to the West Bank and see for ourselves what was happening in East Jerusalem, Hebron, Jenin. And Abdeen said, Michael, you have to come to Gaza because whatever you see in the West Bank will pale in comparison to what you see in Gaza. And then I said to Abdeen, well, we're going to get into Gaza. And Abdeen said, Michael, it looks very, very good. And of course, on the 22nd of December, we got the note that said, it doesn't look so good. Not only doesn't it look so good, the Egyptians said they've denied us the permit for the one place 1,400 of us could meet, and that any demonstrations will be met essentially by repression. We decided to go in any case and then schedule a trip to the West Bank if we didn't make it. So we went to Cairo, and Cairo, the only way to, and there's other people who describe it better than I, but in some way it was like a mini Seattle. I mean, there were demonstrations everywhere, always surrounded by police, cops, informants in all our meetings. And of course, the fact that we couldn't have a meeting of 1,400 people in one place meant that we were all in these small little hotels spread around the city, and the leadership had to just run around trying to get some cohesiveness. It was an intense experience because, particularly with my children, I didn't know what to expect in what many would call a police state in terms of demonstrations. But we did it. We went to demonstrations. We weren't beaten ourselves. We saw the cops. It was a very, very militant experience. And then when we realized we weren't getting into Gaza, and lots of people tried to go to El Arish and got arrested taking buses or taxis or their hotels surrounded, we decided to go to the West Bank. And we got on a plane from Cairo to Tel Aviv. It was night, so I didn't stay in Tel Aviv at all and just drove to East Jerusalem. And on the plane, I happened to meet somebody who was taking his family, and he was going on one of the traditional Israel trips where you see what Israel wants to show you. And he was even going to sleep in, he said, a Bedouin tent. And I said, well, that's interesting. And I remember the last time I was in Israel was 50 years ago. And I remember the Bedouin tents and the camels and the goats and all. And then, and I'll just jump ahead, and then when you get to East Jerusalem and you see a small strip of land when you look out from the hill where some Bedouins live, or when you go out toward the Dead Sea area and you see how the Bedouins live, and it's like tiny tin shacks where there are olive trees, or their trees have been cut down, where they're near polluted sites of factories. And you say, and they're being pushed, they're no longer nomadic because the Israelis won't allow them to be nomadic, and they're just being pushed out and made smaller and smaller and smaller. And of course, the experience of these people was going to be in some Bedouin tent, probably in the Negev. In any case, we get to East Jerusalem, and the first day, immediately around the corner from where we stay, is the Palestinian area village of Sheikh Jarrah, which is part of East Jerusalem. You may have heard of it. It's a place in which Palestinians are being pushed out and pushed out. And we went down to that village, really, to go on a bus to the Erez Crossing. The Erez Crossing is the way to get into Gaza from the Israeli side. And of course, we had expected the Gaza Freedom March people to come from the other side, and there was going to be a meeting, not a literal meeting, a meeting behind the wall, one side on one wall and one on the other, and some yelling and screaming where we could hear each other. And the wall at the Erez Crossing is quite high. I mean, I don't know, 30, 40 feet high all the way across. But we go down to Sheikh Jarrah to catch the bus with the Palestinians out to the Erez Crossing. And we sit under a tent with a man named Nasser, who shows us his house across the street, which has Israeli flags draping the house now. That was his house. He spent 4 years trying to keep that house when the Israeli settlers tried to take it away. And he said that, and this was true of almost all the Palestinians I met, that they weren't just refugees once, but they were refugees at least twice. He had been born, or his family had been born in a village near Haifa in Israel, been pushed out of there in the 48 war. Then the UN, no less, built him this house in Sheikh Jarrah in 1956. And then, of course, the Israelis now, through using whatever law they want, whether it's the Ottoman law or the mandate law under the British or the Israeli law, whatever law they can use to show that he didn't have ownership of that piece of land back to the Ottoman Empire in 1914, before the First World War. And so he's sitting under a tent. The settlers are living in that house. So that was at least a first glimpse of what was going on in East Jerusalem, and the fact that people could move in with really the push by the government, because in the end, the soldiers came and blew the door off his house so that they could take control of the house. We took the bus out to the Erez Crossing. We weren't expecting to get into Gaza. It wasn't about that. It was about a protest about really what many have called, and what I think is appropriate, the world's biggest jail, because that's what it is. So we were there with about maybe 1,000 Palestinians, 100, 200 people, Israelis as well as some non-Israeli solidarity people like me. And of course, when you come to the Erez Crossing, what you see is a picture. It's got to be 15 feet high, two of them, of a man named Shalit. Shalit is the Israeli soldier who is currently a prisoner in Gaza, but of course is the person who the Israelis claim is somehow part of their justification for keeping 1.5 million people in Gaza in a prison and for killing some 1,400 people during the war. The next day we come back to East Jerusalem and we go on a march. And there is the opposition in Israel is not terrific, I have to say, and my friends who are on the left there say it's grown smaller and smaller over the last couple of years. We went on a march of Israelis in protest against the evictions in Sheikh Jarrah. And that started in West Jerusalem, Israel controlled. It's all controlled by Israel, but Israel claims ownership, of course, now of all of Jerusalem. It started in West Jerusalem, where mostly Israelis live. And we started the march with very young people, which was encouraging. And of course, as we go through West Jerusalem, we get pelted with apples and water is poured on us. And there's basically people saying, we shouldn't be doing this. But then as you enter East Jerusalem in the Palestinian section, then cheers go up and smiles go up, and it's a feeling really that you're actually doing something. That march, while we were on it, was nonviolent. Many people were arrested the week before and were arrested the week after. The Israelis are having trouble figuring out what to do with straight civil disobedience that they can't label, as terrorism. The next day, we went on a tour of East Jerusalem, and that's where I think I was almost the most astounded by anything I have seen. And until you see it, until you see an apartheid system in action, you just can't believe what you're seeing. And my children, who are 19 and 21, could not believe what was laid out in front of them. You go to a part of East Jerusalem what the Israelis call Area C. Area C, under the various agreements, is an area that will eventually be taken over completely by Israel. And what they're doing in Area C of East Jerusalem, and understand they have no right to an inch of East Jerusalem, not under any right under international law, under the law of conquest, under the Geneva Convention, nothing. You can't do a thing in there. They shouldn't be taking an inch of it, or in the West Bank, not an inch. And they're taking over Area C, and they're demolishing houses with bulldozers. And you rebuild them, the Palestinians rebuild them, and they demolish them again and again and again. And they go in there and Palestinians rebuild. So you're seeing an area that's being ethnically cleansed by the Israelis in East Jerusalem. As astounding as that was, when we looked out from the hill where that place that was Area C was being cleansed, we looked out across a valley and up into a hill on the other side where what our New York Times and others refer to as a settlement is being built. It's Maladunum. And it's a settlement of 50,000 people. So the word settlement, I just want to say, doesn't describe anything that we read in our media at all. This is not like a few people in a frontier who are Orthodox Jews trying to claim the land, as some biblical injunction or something. This is an intentional, obvious way of Israel to grab land in West Bank and just annex it to East Jerusalem, and then, of course, annex the whole thing to current Israel. So you look out from the edge of the hill over the valley, and what you see in the valley is you see what I called in an article the architecture of apartheid. You see the roads, first the kind of roads that are meant to bypass all of the Israeli cities in the West Bank, and that's what they have to be called, they're not settlements, so that the Palestinians can go from one little area to another little area to another little area. The three areas that if there's ever a so-called two-state solution, they'll get. And I just want to say, there's a two-state solution. Once you see this, I mean, it's completely ridiculous. It's three Bantustans set out in what you call the West Bank, connected by bypass roads, not connected to each other, with Israel controlling everything about those three so-called parts of a Palestinian state. So you look out in this valley, and first you see the bypass roads. Then you see the roads that I'm sure you've seen before, with the big wall down the middle, in which Palestinians drive on one side and Israelis drive on the other. Palestinians to go to their villages, Israelis to go to their villages. And then, of course, you see the wall, the famous wall that's grabbing 15% at least, if not more, of the West Bank. And you see it. It's a high wall. It's 15, 20 meters sometimes at various places. And you see it snaking through this valley. So you're looking down at a valley of dual roads, bypass roads, and a wall. And then you're looking at the few Bedouins I described that are still left there, living in tin shacks with every single olive tree cut down. And then you're looking right in the middle of the first police precinct in that valley, built by the money from an American, $10 million, not even built by the Israeli government, an Israeli police precinct right in the center of that valley. Then we go across one of the roads up into Maladunum, the village of 50,000 people, Israeli village. And there you might as well be looking at Beverly Hills, or Shaker Heights, or a place where it's lush greenery, a typical what they call a dormitory community, what we would call a bedroom community, huge swimming pool being built twice, 3 times the size of this room in a place that has no water, 50,000 people living there, greenery everywhere, 400-year-old olive trees in the centers of roundabouts that have been taken from Palestinian land. And you walk away from there and you say to yourself, this is an open and notorious system of apartheid, and it's incredibly shocking. And my children said to me, they said, Michael, how could this be going on and no one is doing anything about it? And so that came to me, I've not been an incredible activist by any means on Palestine. I certainly am after this trip, but I never had any sense until you see that of the open and notorious taking of land, past systems, apartheid system that Israel has set up in the West Bank. The last part of the trip I'll just mention because it's a short short talk, was we also went to Hebron. And I think we were all just floored by Hebron. I mean, a lot of us have seen the pictures and et cetera of what's going on there. But you go into let's say a place like the Village, 20, 30 square blocks of Palestinians. In the middle, there's one apartment house that maybe holds 50 or 100 what they call settlers. Next, to get into there, you have to walk in. There's big concrete blocks on every street except for one. There's guard posts all around it. And the Israeli settlers can drive into their apartment house. The Palestinians have to walk sometimes a kilometer or more to get their food in, and they use burros or mules or donkeys to carry their food in. They're walking on foot to go to school, to do anything. The others, the Israeli settlers, are taking cars in. And they're next, and this is one of the poignant things for me, there next to this apartment house is an ambulance given by, somebody from Palm Beach, it says on the side. And it's obviously the only few cars in there, and they all belong to the Jewish settlers. And that ambulance is used to take Israeli settlers to the hospital if they get ill. But what should happen if your child, and of course you think about that as a parent, if your child gets ill and has to go to the hospital? Well, that child is not going to go in that ambulance. That ambulance will not be used to carry out a Palestinian child. You will have to wait 2, 3, maybe more days to get a permit to take you out of your village, your part of Hebron, into a hospital that can actually take care of you. At another place, we went on a roof, and this is again the training of hate. You look down and you saw a few Israeli settler children playing in a yard, and I'm on top of a house with Palestinian. And these small children felt completely, what's the way to say this, empowered to throw rocks at us, because I'm standing with a Palestinian family on top of this roof. And they're sort of the rulers of this area. And so I think we just came away from our trip to the West Bank, just as I started this, as saying we are seeing in front of us a horrific crime in the making, still going on, and the world is doing really very little, if not, I would almost say nothing, nothing about it. And that's where really I think that all of us here, and that's my optimism, that the fact that we have all of us here, we had 1,400 people on the Gaza Freedom March. My optimism is that civil society, if that's what we want to call ourselves, or activists, or militant activists, are really going to be the people who change this equation. I don't think it's going to change inside Israel. I just think that, the BDS campaign, I think, is the way to push that. I just think that within Israel, the marches, the demonstrations are smaller and smaller. But outside, they're bigger and bigger. And so that's my optimism. So thank you all, and thank you particularly for the Gaza Freedom March.